all of you know that this week we had a real chance to take important steps toward ending this war. If only Putin had not been afraid to come to Turkey. And I was ready for a direct meeting with Putin, whether in Ankara or in Istanbul, and not just for a meeting, but to resolve all the important issues to my mind. But he didn't agree to anything. I mean, Putin. And you can also see that the Russian delegation that came to Istanbul is of a very low level. None of them are people who actually make decisions.
The first direct peace talks in 3 years between Russia and Ukraine, they wrapped up just a short time ago in Turkey. Not in attendance, Russian President Vladimir Putin or Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky or U.S. President Trump. He says he plans on meeting with Vladimir Putin soon, and that's where real progress will be made. Let's get right to the White House. CNN's Kristen Holmes is there. Good morning.
Good morning, John. Well, that's right. This week of wheeling and dealing in the Middle East is over, and now that focus is on peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. And Donald Trump himself had been floating this idea that he might go and somehow serve as mediator between Putin and Zelensky should they both decide to go. Of course, that became more evident that he was not going to be doing that, as we saw Putin backing out of these negotiations, or at least rejecting this offer to sit in on them. So there are really low expectations from the U.S. on what's going to come out of here. But Donald Trump himself says he's holding out hope he can still have these direct conversations with Vladimir Putin. Take a listen.
I think it's time for us to just do it. I said, they all said Putin was going and Zelensky was going, and I said, if I don't go, I guarantee Putin's not going. And he didn't go, and I understand that.
When do you think you'll meet the president?
As soon as we can set it up.
He also said that maybe he would have a call with Putin. He spoke to reporters on the plane once they got on their way back to the U.S. He also said that he thought that they could solve it together, but maybe not, but at least then they would know. I mean, one thing that we know is happening here, particularly with the United States, is that they don't want the administration to in any way look like Vladimir Putin is taking advantage of them. They want to look strong in these negotiations, which of course is why Donald Trump appeared to have waited until it was clear Putin wasn't going to say that he also would not be attending those talks. John?
All right, Kristen Holmes, great to have you back on in the mornings after a very important assignment. Thank you very much. All right, with us now, Jill Doherty, our CNN contributor and former Moscow bureau chief. And Jill, I want to read you a couple very early readouts that we just got from these fairly low-level Ukrainian-Russian meetings. First, we were told that the Ukrainians only spoke to the Russians through an interpreter, which is always interesting because Russia is widely spoken in Ukraine. And the second thing here from a Ukrainian source with knowledge of the negotiations, they said the Russia delegation did not have any mandate to make important decisions. They're not ready to decide anything meaningful to end the war. Those are the latest tidbits. What's your read on them?
I'm not surprised. I mean, language is really a factor here because Ukrainians, yes, some of them speak Russian, but fewer and fewer are speaking Russian because they're speaking Ukrainian, which is a different, though related language. So it's a political statement to speak Ukrainian. And then the fact that they didn't get very far and that delegation from Russia wasn't that high up and couldn't make decisions, also very predictable because we know that almost deliberately they didn't send the foreign minister. They sent, these are competent people, but they are not very high up in the ranking. So, but I think both of those are predictable. But then you have to go back to President Trump, who basically said nothing much is going to happen in Istanbul until Vladimir Putin and I meet and talk.
Talk to me more about that and why that statement has implications not just on the meetings that just took place, but also on the broader situation here and how it's being viewed in Europe.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Right now I'm in Tallinn, Estonia, and that is one of the countries you'd have to say right on the front line with Russia. And it's a security conference, so believe me, everybody here is talking about exactly this issue. But I think, if you look at these discussions, I don't really believe that Putin, even if he meets President Trump, which probably will happen, that he will necessarily change his mind, because he's not just looking at Ukraine. Ukraine is a very important issue, but I think Putin's ultimate objective is what he was talking about way back at the beginning when Russia invaded Ukraine, which is a very big picture. It's not only, Ukraine can never join NATO, it's that you push NATO out of Eastern Europe, push them out of this region and go back to like 1991. And that, of course, is never going to happen. But that literally is one of the demands of Vladimir Putin. So he's got a long-term objective. And I do believe that President Trump doesn't quite comprehend that demand that Putin is making. It's very big. He wants to literally define security in Europe, or lack of security, which it would be.
Yeah, and again, you are right now in a country that's on the front lines of this sort of rhetorical and physical resistance to Russia. What's the view from there on whether there has been a back and forth swing on how the Americans are behaving? President Trump for the first time had words that were construed by some as a little bit tougher on Vladimir Putin. Even J.D. Vance did. But now President Trump is going back to saying that he wants to powwow with Putin. So is it a little bit of like a tennis match from the European perspective?
Well, I mean, it is confusing. And I think that that's probably due to both President Trump, who's been kind of back and forth, but also Vladimir Putin. You kind of shake it up, get a lot of confusion in the situation, and it works for him to temporize, to think, well, I can get a better deal. Let's see what happens. But I think the mood here, John, is that people obviously, since they were invaded and taken over by the Soviet Union in 1940, it's a difficult relationship with Russia. That said, if you ask what they think about President Trump, I think they're worried. They are worried that President Trump ultimately may just kind of walk away and say, look, I tried, these parties can't get it together, I'm out of here, and it's in the hands of the Europeans. So that is a concern, because even though the Europeans are rallying, and they're rallying actually quite quickly with more sanctions, giving more money. By the way, Estonia itself is going to be giving 5.4% of its GDP, which is a lot more than the United States does, to its own defense, which is for NATO. So they're very serious about it. But I do think the one phrase that I did hear over and over again was, Estonia was right. And Estonia meaning not only Estonia, but a lot of people in this region. Estonia was right in 2022 when they said that Vladimir Putin would invade Ukraine. And they would argue, people weren't paying attention. But of course, now everybody understands that that's precisely what happened.
Yeah, this is no game for Estonia. This is no deal, per se. This is life and death. Jill Doherty, thank you for being there. Thank you for joining us this morning. All right, with us now, CNN Global Affairs analyst Kim Dozier. So, Kim, what does that do? There are low-level meetings happening right now in Turkey between Russia and Ukraine. But what does it do to those meetings if President Trump says, the only way this is going to get done is if I meet with Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, this feels like a cakewalk where Putin keeps pulling the chairs out from underneath Ukraine, and Trump just lets them. Across Europe and in Ukraine, where I just was, they're feeling like Trump always sides with Putin. But in Ukraine, the idea is if we just keep showing up, if we show that we are the willing party here, eventually, hopefully, Trump will see that Putin is playing him and the rest of us, and that he has no intentions of engaging in a ceasefire or engaging in real, meaningful peace talks. He wants to capture Ukraine.
Why is it, if you can explain, that the idea of Trump saying that he wants to meet with Putin, why is it seen by people in Ukraine and, frankly, across Europe that is caving to Putin's demands?
Because in the run-up to this, remember, a number of European leaders took the long train ride into Kyiv, and together with President Zelensky, they agreed that a ceasefire would start this past week, and that Putin had to comply with it or face massive sanctions. And Trump indicated that he also agreed with that. They called him from Kyiv and he agreed to that. A day later, Putin says, well, how about talks? We should do direct talks. So that was his way of heading off the threat of sanctions from not complying with the ceasefire. And it wouldn't have worked, except Trump endorsed it and said to Zelensky by tweet, well, you better show up in Turkey. Zelensky showed up. Putin is the no-show, and somehow Putin keeps getting excused. So that's the narrative as it's seen here in Tallinn, Estonia, in the Baltics, in Kyiv. They just feel like Trump admires Putin so much that he just keeps giving him a pass.